As I enrolled in my first semester of college, it seemed like a good idea at the time to attack the courses required by my Naval ROTC scholarship head on. So right out of the gate, I signed up for second semester calculus. By some miracle, I had placed out of the first. And for good measure, a course in calculus-based physics. It was not a good idea in the least. That first semester of college, with study skills not yet fully formed, I explored bold new regions of the alphabet into which my grades had never ventured. Across 3 physics exams, I scored 100. Cumulative. In my defense, it was no easy class. My 33 1/3 test average was good for a C- on the curve. But any aspirations I might have had of becoming a nuclear physicist ended right there and then. I did retain a few basic concepts from my wanderings in the physics wilderness, however, like the difference between kinetic energy and potential energy. Potential energy, in simple terms, is stored energy, or energy waiting to be expended or released. Think of a ball sitting motionless atop a steep hill. Or think of an arrow that is notched into a tightly drawn bowstring. Both are in a position to move, so they have potential energy. Kinetic energy, by contrast, is that energy put into motion. It is the energy of the ball rolling down the hill. It is the energy of the arrow launched in flight. All of which brings me to Thanksgiving. But wait a moment. Maybe I failed to connect a few of the dots there. So let me back up and explain. There's a phrase associated with Thanksgiving that drives me a little bit nuts. I have to count my blessings. Now, the counting of blessings is not a bad exercise of itself. It's good to be mindful of the many ways in which my life is full and joyous and meaningful. Good to name the relationships that add love and laughter to my days. Good to take note of the gifts and comforts and privileges that I enjoy. The counting of blessings far surpasses not counting them, simply taking them for granted, failing to acknowledge the gifts in my life for what they are. The counting of blessings is a genuine appreciation of all that I have and all that I experience. It is a form of gratitude. And I would add, it is insufficient unto itself. It is a readiness for something more. Here's where I was going with the physics connection. My blessings, carefully counted, my blessings exhaustively inventoried, my blessings acknowledged and appreciated, it seems to me, might be called potential gratitude. That is, gratitude built up and stored up, gratitude that is awaiting release. The counting of blessings is like the drawing of the bow of my gratitude. But kinetic gratitude, well, that would be the arrow in flight, or gratitude that is set in motion. And I suggest that the move from gratitude stored up to gratitude poured out, my cup overflows, is a significant spiritual move. Now, to explore that point, I want us first to consider our text from Luke for this morning, commonly known as the parable of the rich fool. The rich part of the description comes from the fact that the man might be said to be profoundly blessed. Jesus begins, "The land of a rich man produced abundantly." Now, for starters, let's consider the obvious. He owns land. Whether by virtue of inheritance or wise acquisition, the man possesses land to farm, which in a predominantly agricultural economy is a blessing indeed. He is a landowner and not a sharecropper. In fact, as we'll see in a minute, he isn't disposed to sharing his crops at all. So he has land, which is a blessing, and he has a lot of land. How do I know? because Jesus says the land of a rich man. So he doesn't own a small plot and scratch out a living for his family. He isn't a subsistence farmer, in other words, living hand to mouth and getting by season to season. He has land, and he has a lot of land, which is an additional blessing. And as long as we're counting, he has good land. How do I know that? It produced abundantly. If you've traveled to Israel, you'll recall that much of the land looks like this. Dry and scrubby and rocky. But this man's land is fertile, productive soil, which means consistent access to water, another blessing in a desert climate. So his land has consistently produced not a simple sufficiency, but a significant surplus. And how do I know that? He has barns, plural. And now even they have become insufficient to stockpile the yield. So truly, this is a man who can count his blessings. He has an overabundance of what I call potential gratitude. We can imagine him humming an old Louis Armstrong tune to himself. Sitting in the sun, counting my money, fanned by a summer breeze. Sweeter than the honey is counting my money, those greenbacks on the trees. But for all the blessings he counts, the rich man, the rich fool as he is known, fundamentally fails to grasp the need or the calling to do anything with them. He has all the potential gratitude in the world stored up, but it hasn't translated into kinetic gratitude. He hasn't set his gratitude in motion, and there is a futility in that. In the parable, Jesus' point is that there's more to life than an abundance of resources. Elsewhere in Mark, he says, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul or lose his life?" The rich fool is Jesus' fictitious illustration of the point. He has barns upon barns upon barns that are still insufficient to hold his crops, but he has not loved God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, nor his neighbor as himself. He's made no connection between his abundance and his neighbor's scarcity. And he has failed to grasp the truth expressed in James chapter 1, verse 27. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Instead, he says to himself, "Self, you have plenty of goods laid up for many years. Relax. Eat, drink, be merry. You have won the rat race." And God says, "You do know what winning the rat race makes you, right? This very night, your fictitious life is required of you, fictitious man." It's a parable, remember. "And what good has all your blessing counting, your blessing stockpiling, profited you in the end? This is how it shall be," Jesus says, "for those who are, in the words of the old hymn, rich in things but poor in soul. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God." And what does it mean to be rich toward God? Well, to flash back to last week's sermon for a moment, it means investing actively and intentionally in the things that God would invest in. And what would God invest in? Not soybean futures. God would invest lavishly and generously in the hungry, the hurting, the homeless, the hopeless, the last, the lost, and the least. God would make the connection between the abundance in the man's barns and the need of the man's neighbors. As you have done it unto the least of these, my family, you have done it unto me. The reason you count your blessings, in other words, is so that you have a proper inventory for distribution. If we want to know what God would say to the rich fool, we can go back to what God says to Abram in Genesis 12. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. It's the "so that" part of the equation where potential gratitude or stored gratitude gets converted to kinetic gratitude or gratitude in motion. That's God's calculus. God blesses us so that we can bless others in need of blessing. God forgives us in order that we can forgive those in need of forgiveness. God comforts us so that we can become providers of comfort. I might think of blessings not merely as God's gifts to me, but as God's gifts through me. In the words of another old hymn, all that we have is thine alone, a trust, O Lord, from thee. A trust, O Lord, from thee. All blessings flow, but if I store them in ever bigger barns, then I'm stemming the flow, building a dam, and claiming as my own that which I have been given charge over. Stewardship is placing ourselves and our resources at God's disposal. It's as simple as that. And we're not called to give everything, simply to recognize that we have enough. Enough to spare. Enough to share. Enough is the lesson that the rich fool never grasps. Instead, he builds ever bigger barns to warehouse his blessings until they grow too numerous for him to count anymore. Today, we have ample opportunity to put our gratitude in motion. We can do so through our pledged commitments to the work of this church. We can do so through our generous support of the Alternative Gift Fair, which is a unique opportunity, as Greta shared a minute ago, to share gifts that are twofold. And in the wonderful calculus of God's compassion, the more we give, the richer we become. Thanks be to God. Amen.